"Alan, where's my blue folder?" I called out, rifling through the pile of papers on the kitchen counter. "I need it for the meeting today." Alan barely glanced up from his phone. "I think Beth borrowed it yesterday." My heart sank. Beth borrowed my work folder? Why? "She needed something to organize her recipes," Alan said casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Alan, that folder has important documents for my promotion meeting today. I need it back." "Relax, Emily. It's just a folder," he muttered, scrolling through his phone. "Just a folder." I felt a mix of frustration and disbelief. This was supposed to be a celebration. I had worked tirelessly for this promotion, and now I was scrambling to find my materials because Alan's sister thought it was okay to help herself to my things. "Where is she now?" I asked, already heading towards the guest room where Beth and Robert were staying. "She went out with Robert. They'll be back soon," Alan replied, still not looking up. I knocked on the guest room door, half expecting to find it locked. To my surprise, it swung open, revealing a chaotic mess. Clothes were strewn everywhere, and my blue folder lay on the bed, papers scattered around it. I quickly gathered the documents, my hands shaking with a mix of anger and urgency. As I walked back to the kitchen, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. My usually composed reflection looked frazzled, eyes wide with frustration. I had never imagined that a simple folder could cause such turmoil. "Got it," I said curtly, holding up the folder. "See? No big deal," Alan said, finally putting down his phone. "No big deal." I snapped. "This is a huge deal, Alan. I need you to understand that my work is important." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Emily, you're overreacting. Beth didn't mean any harm. That's not the point. She shouldn't be taking my things without asking," I said, my voice trembling with the effort to stay calm. "And you should have told her that." Alan looked at me, his expression a mix of confusion and annoyance. "You're blowing this out of proportion. It's just a folder." I clenched my fists, feeling a wave of helplessness wash over me. How could he not see the problem? This wasn't just about a folder. It was about respect, boundaries, and the fact that he always seemed to prioritize his sister's needs over mine. "I have to go," I said, grabbing my bag. "We'll talk about this later." As I drove to work, I tried to push the morning's events out of my mind and focus on the presentation ahead. But the frustration lingered, gnawing at the edges of my concentration. This promotion was a big step for me, and I needed to be at my best. The meeting went well, and I returned home that evening with a sense of accomplishment. But as soon as I walked through the door, the tension from the morning returned. Beth and Robert were in the living room, watching TV and laughing as if they owned the place. "Hey, Emily," Beth called out cheerfully. "How was your day?" "Fine," I replied tersely, heading straight to the bedroom. I needed a moment to collect myself before facing them. Alan followed me, closing the door behind him. "Emily, can we talk?" I turned to face him, my eyes flashing with anger. "Talk about what, Alan? How your sister invaded my privacy and disrupted my work? Or how you don't seem to care?" "I do care," he said defensively, "but you're making a mountain out of a molehill." I shook my head, feeling a mix of sadness and frustration. "Alan, this isn't just about today. It's about how you always put Beth's needs above mine. I need you to understand that." He looked at me, his expression softening. "I'm sorry, Emily. I didn't realize it was such a big deal." I sighed, feeling a glimmer of hope. "I just need you to be more considerate, Alan. That's all I'm asking." He nodded, pulling me into a hug. "I'll try, I promise." As I rested my head on his shoulder, I hoped that things would change. But deep down, a part of me remained skeptical. This wasn't the first time we'd had this conversation, and I feared it wouldn't be the last. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had to give. I loved Alan, but I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change, and soon. I had barely unpacked my suitcase when Alan approached me, a hesitant look on his face. "Emily, can we talk for a minute?" I sighed, setting down the stack of clothes I was folding. What is it, Alan? Beth and Robert need a place to stay for a few weeks. They're having some trouble with their apartment, he said, avoiding my eyes. I felt a familiar knot of frustration tighten in my chest. Alan, we've talked about this. They can't just keep invading our space whenever they feel like it. They have nowhere else to go, he insisted. It's just for a little while. Please, Emily. I wanted to refuse, to stand my ground, but the pleading look in his eyes made me hesitate. Fine, I said reluctantly, but they need to respect our home and our boundaries. Of course, Alan said, relief washing over his face. I'll make sure they do. I nodded, though I doubted his words. Beth and Robert had never shown much regard for our space or our rules. But I didn't have the energy to argue further. I had another business trip coming up, and I needed to focus on that. The next morning, Beth and Robert arrived with their suitcases and a chaotic energy that immediately disrupted the calm of our home. Beth flitted around the house, rearranging things to her liking, while Robert sprawled on the couch, flipping through channels on the TV. Emily, do you mind if I use your office to work on some things? Beth asked, already heading towards my sanctuary without waiting for a response. Actually, I do mind, I said, stepping in front of her. I need that space for my work. Beth pouted, but she backed off. Fine, I'll find somewhere else. I watched her retreat, feeling a small victory. But the relief was short-lived. As the days passed, their presence became more intrusive. Robert's loud phone calls filled the house, and Beth's constant need for attention grated on my nerves. One evening, I returned from a particularly grueling day at work to find the living room in disarray. Empty takeout containers littered the coffee table, and a stain on the carpet indicated a spill that no one had bothered to clean up. Beth! Robert! I called out, my voice echoing through the house. Beth appeared from the kitchen, a guilty look on her face. Oh, hey, Emily. We were just about to clean up. Really? Because it doesn't look like it, I said, my frustration boiling over. We've been busy, Robert said defensively, appearing behind Beth. Cut us some slack. Busy doing what? Making a mess. I snapped. This is our home, and you need to respect it. Calm down, Emily, Alan said, coming into the room. There are guests. Guests who are overstaying their welcome. I shot back. I'm tired of coming home to a disaster zone. Alan looked taken aback by my outburst. We'll clean up, okay? Just relax. I stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. I felt trapped, suffocated by the constant intrusion and the lack of support from Alan. Something had to change. The next morning, as I prepared for my trip, Alan approached me again. Emily, I know things have been tense, but can we try to make this work? Alan, I'm trying, I said, my voice weary. But I need you to understand how hard this is for me. I do, he said, taking my hand. I'll talk to them, make sure they respect our space. I nodded, though I wasn't convinced. I hope you do, Alan, because I can't keep living like this. As I drove to the airport, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. I loved Alan, but his inability to set boundaries with his sister was tearing us apart. When I returned from my trip, the house was eerily quiet. I found Alan in the kitchen, a somber look on his face. What's wrong? I asked, my heart sinking. Beth and Robert had a fight, he said quietly. Robert's gone, and Beth is a mess. I felt a pang of sympathy, but it was overshadowed by exhaustion. Alan, I can't keep doing this. We need to set some boundaries for our sake. He nodded, looking defeated. I know, Emily. I'll talk to her. But as I looked into his eyes, I knew it wouldn't be enough. Something had to give, and soon. I stepped through the front door, my eyes immediately scanning the living room for signs of chaos. To my surprise, everything seemed in order. The relief was short-lived, however, as I heard raised voices coming from the kitchen. Beth, you can't just do whatever you want in someone else's house. Alan's voice was strained, tinged with frustration. I needed to use the computer, Alan. It's not a big deal. Beth shot back, her tone defensive. I walked into the kitchen to find Beth sitting at the dining table, her laptop open, while Alan stood with his arms crossed, looking exasperated. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice cutting through the tension. "Beth was using your computer without asking," Alan said, his eyes meeting mine. I felt a surge of anger. "Beth, we've talked about this. You need to ask before using our things." Beth rolled her eyes. "I didn't think it would be a problem. I just needed to check my emails." "It's always something with you," I said, my patience wearing thin. "You need to respect our boundaries." Beth huffed, closing her laptop with a snap. "Fine. I won't touch anything of yours again." I could see Alan's frustration mirrored in my own. This was becoming unbearable. As Beth stormed out of the kitchen, I turned to Alan. "We need to set some ground rules, Alan. This can't keep happening." "I know, Emily. I'm trying," he said, running a hand through his hair. "But it's hard. She's my sister. And I'm your wife," I said softly. "I need you to stand up for us." He nodded, looking defeated. "I'll talk to her." Again. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a losing battle. I needed a plan, something that would make Alan see the reality of the situation. A thought crossed my mind and I reached for my phone, dialing my brother Mike's number. "Hey, Mike answered, his voice warm and familiar. "Hey, Mike. I need your help," I said, explaining the situation with Beth and Robert. Mike listened patiently, and when I finished, he said, "I think I have an idea. Why don't I come stay with you for a while? Maybe seeing someone else invade his space will make Alan understand." I considered his suggestion, a glimmer of hope sparking within me. "That might just work. When can you come?" "I can be there tomorrow," Mike said. "Hang in there, sis. We'll get through this." The next day, Mike arrived with a suitcase in tow. Alan looked surprised, but didn't object when I explained that Mike needed a place to stay for a while. "Welcome, Mike," Alan said, forcing a smile. "Make yourself at home." Mike wasted no time settling in, and it wasn't long before his presence started to mirror Beth's intrusiveness. He left his belongings scattered around the house, played loud music, and used Alan's things without asking. "Mike, can you turn that down?" Alan shouted over the blaring music one evening. "Sure thing, bro," Mike called back, lowering the volume slightly, but not enough to make a significant difference. I watched Alan's frustration grow with each passing day, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Maybe now he would understand what I had been dealing with. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, Alan finally snapped. "Mike, you need to start respecting our space. This is our home, and you're being inconsiderate." Mike looked at him, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "I'm just doing what Beth and Robert do." I thought it was okay. Alan's face fell, and he turned to me, realization dawning in his eyes. "Emily, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how bad it was." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and vindication. "Now you see what I've been dealing with." Alan sighed, rubbing his temples. "I'll talk to Beth and Robert. They need to find their own place." As he left the room, I felt a sense of hope for the first time in weeks. Maybe things would finally change. But as I looked at Mike, I knew this was just the beginning. There was still a long road ahead, and I needed to be prepared for whatever came next. The next morning, Alan sat down with Beth and Robert, explaining that they needed to find their own place. Beth looked hurt, but she didn't argue. Robert, however, was less understanding. "Where are we supposed to go?" he demanded. "That's for you to figure out," Alan said firmly. "You can't stay here anymore." As they packed their things, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. But I knew this was only a temporary solution. The real test would be whether Alan could maintain these boundaries in the future. As I watched them leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. But for now, I would take the small victory and prepare for whatever came next. I had barely unpacked from my last trip when Alan approached me, his face pale. "Emily, we need to talk." I set my suitcase down, bracing myself. "What now, Alan?" "It's Beth. She's in trouble," he said, his voice trembling. She and Robert had a huge fight. He left her, and she has nowhere to go. I felt a wave of frustration and exhaustion wash over me. Alan, we can't keep doing this. She needs to find her own way. I know, but she's my sister. She's family, he pleaded, his eyes filled with desperation. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. Fine. She can stay for a few days, but this is the last time. She needs to find a permanent solution. Thank you, Emily, Alan said, wrapping me in a tight hug. Beth arrived later that evening, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and shame. I'm sorry, Emily. I know this is a lot to ask. I nodded, forcing a smile. Just make sure you respect our space, Beth. We all need to make this work. The first few days were relatively calm. Beth kept to herself, and I started to believe that maybe things would be different this time. But that hope quickly faded. One evening, I returned home to find Beth and Alan in the middle of a heated argument. I can't believe you're taking her side, Beth shouted, her face flushed with anger. I'm not taking sides, Beth, Alan replied, his voice strained. But you can't just take over our lives. You've changed, Alan. Ever since you married her. Beth spat, glaring at me as I entered the room. What's going on? I asked, my heart pounding. Beth thinks I'm not supporting her enough, Alan said, his eyes filled with frustration. I just need some help, Alan. You used to be there for me, Beth said, her voice breaking. I felt a pang of sympathy but quickly pushed it aside. Beth, we've given you all the support we can. You need to start taking responsibility for your own life. Beth looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and desperation. You don't understand what it's like to be abandoned. Maybe not, I said, my voice firm. But I do know what it's like to feel like your home is no longer your own. Beth stormed off, slamming the door behind her. Alan looked at me, his face etched with worry. I don't know what to do, Emily. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. We need to set some boundaries, Alan, for our sake and for hers. The next morning, I woke up to find the kitchen in disarray. Dirty dishes piled up in the sink, and the smell of burnt toast lingered in the air. I found Beth sitting at the dining table, her head in her hands. Beth, we need to talk, I said, sitting down across from her. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. I know, Emily. I'm sorry. I'm just so lost. I felt a mix of frustration and sympathy. You need to find a way to stand on your own, Beth. We can't keep doing this. I don't know where to start, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe you should talk to Alan's parents, I suggested. They might be able to help you find a more permanent solution. Beth nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. I'll call them. That evening, as I prepared for yet another business trip, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. I found Alan in the living room, staring at his phone. Alan, we need to make a decision, I said, sitting down beside him. Beth can't keep coming back here every time something goes wrong. I know, he said, his voice heavy with resignation. I'll talk to my parents. Maybe they can help. As I boarded the plane the next morning, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. I hoped that Alan would follow through, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. When I returned home a week later, the house was eerily quiet. I found Alan in the kitchen, his face pale and drawn. What's wrong? I asked, my heart sinking. Beth called our parents. They're coming over tomorrow to talk, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. This was it, the moment of truth. We would finally have to face the reality of our situation, and I wasn't sure if our marriage could withstand the strain. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. I loved Alan, but his inability to set boundaries with his sister was tearing us apart. Tomorrow would be a turning point, one way or another, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy heart, knowing that today would be a turning point. Norma and Joseph were coming over to discuss Beth's situation, and I knew it wouldn't be an easy conversation. I found Alan in the kitchen, brewing coffee with a tense look on his face. "Are you ready for this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded, though his eyes betrayed his uncertainty. "I hope so. We need to find a solution." By mid-morning, Norma and Joseph arrived. Norma greeted me with a warm hug, while Joseph gave me a reassuring smile. They had always been kind and understanding, but I worried about how they would react to the situation. We all sat down in the living room, the tension palpable. Beth sat on the edge of the couch, her eyes downcast. "Beth, we need to talk about your living situation," Joseph began, his voice gentle but firm. "You can't keep relying on Alan and Emily every time something goes wrong." Beth looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "I know, Dad, but I don't know where else to go. Have you considered finding a job and getting your own place?" Norma asked, her tone compassionate. Beth shook her head. "I've been trying, but it's hard." I felt a surge of frustration. "Beth, you need to take responsibility for your life. We can't keep picking up the pieces for you." Alan reached over, taking my hand. "Emily's right. We love you, Beth, but you need to start standing on your own." Beth's tears spilled over, and she looked at me, her expression a mix of desperation and anger. "You don't understand what it's like to be in my shoes." "Maybe not," I said, my voice firm. "But I do know what it's like to feel like your home is no longer your own." Norma placed a hand on Beth's shoulder. "Sweetheart, we're here to help you, but you need to meet us halfway. Let's come up with a plan to get you back on your feet." Beth nodded, wiping her tears. "Okay, I'll try." We spent the next hour discussing potential job opportunities and living arrangements for Beth. It felt like a small victory, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a long road. As the conversation wound down, Norma pulled me aside. "Emily, I want you to know that we appreciate everything you've done for Beth. We're here to support you too." "Thank you, Norma," I said, feeling a wave of gratitude. "I just want what's best for everyone." That evening, after Norma and Joseph left, I found Alan in the kitchen, staring out the window. "How do you think it went?" I asked, joining him. "I think it was a step in the right direction," he said, turning to face me. "But I know it's going to be hard." "We'll get through it," I said, squeezing his hand. "Together." As the days passed, Beth made some progress. She applied for jobs and started looking for her own place. But the strain on our marriage remained. Alan and I had grown distant, the constant stress taking its toll. One evening, as I prepared for yet another business trip, Alan approached me with a solemn look on his face. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. I set down my suitcase, bracing myself. "What is it, Alan?" "I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything that's happened," he began, his eyes searching mine. "I love you, but I don't know if we can keep going like this." My heart sank. "What are you saying?" "I think we need some time apart," he said, his voice breaking, "to figure out what we really want." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I fought to keep my composure. "If that's what you think is best." He nodded, looking pained. "I don't want to lose you, Emily, but I don't know how to fix this. Maybe some time apart will help us see things more clearly," I said, my voice trembling. As I boarded the plane the next morning, I felt a mix of sadness and determination. This was a turning point, and I needed to take control of my life. I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness for the sake of others. When I returned home a week later, the house was empty. Alan had moved out, leaving a note on the kitchen counter. "Emily, I'm staying with my parents for a while. I hope this time apart helps us find our way back to each other. Love, Alan." I felt a pang of sadness, but also a sense of relief. This was my chance to reclaim my life, to find my own path. And I was determined to make the most of it. As I stood in the empty house, I knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them. For the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. The house felt emptier than ever. Alan's absence left a void, but it also gave me the space to think clearly. I knew I needed to take control of the situation, And for that, I needed Mike's help. I picked up the phone and called him. "Hey, sis," Mike answered, his voice a comforting presence. "Mike, I need you to move in for a while," I said, my voice steady but urgent. "I need to show Alan what it's like to live with someone who doesn't respect boundaries." Mike chuckled. "I've been waiting for this call. I'll be there tomorrow." True to his word, Mike arrived the next morning, suitcase in hand and a mischievous glint in his eye. "Ready to shake things up?" "More than ready," I said, feeling a surge of determination. Mike wasted no time settling in. He left his belongings scattered around the house, played loud music at all hours, and used Alan's things without asking. It was like living with a whirlwind, and I knew it wouldn't be long before Alan felt the full impact. A week later, Alan showed up at the house looking haggard. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, his voice strained. "Come in," I said, leading him to the living room where Mike was sprawled on the couch watching TV. "Hey, Alan," Mike called out, not bothering to lower the volume. Alan shot him a glare before turning to me. "Emily, this is getting out of hand. Mike is driving me crazy. Now you know how I felt," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Maybe now you'll understand what it's like to live with someone who doesn't respect your space." Alan looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of frustration and realization. "I get it, Emily. I really do. But this isn't the solution." "Then what is, Alan?" I asked, my voice rising. "Because I've tried everything else, and nothing has worked." Alan sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't know, but we need to find a way to fix this." At that moment, Beth walked in, her eyes widening at the sight of Alan. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice tinged with surprise. "I'm here to talk to Emily," he said, his tone weary. Beth looked at me, her expression a mix of guilt and anger. "I guess I'm the problem again." "Beth, this isn't about blaming you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about finding a way for all of us to coexist without driving each other crazy." Beth crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "And how do you propose we do that?" "We need boundaries," I said firmly. "And everyone needs to respect them." Alan nodded, his eyes meeting mine. "I agree. We need to set some ground rules." Beth looked at both of us, her expression softening. "Okay, I'm willing to try." We spent the next hour discussing boundaries and setting rules for living together. It felt like a step in the right direction, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. There was still a long way to go. That evening, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. I felt a sense of urgency, a need to take control of my life and my future. I reached for my phone and called Mike. "Hey, Em," he answered, his voice warm and reassuring. "Mike, I need to talk to you about something important," I said, my voice trembling. "What's going on?" he asked, concern evident in his tone. "I think it's time for me to take a stand," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I need to show Alan and Beth that I won't be pushed around anymore." "Whatever you need, sis. I'm here for you," Mike said, his voice filled with determination. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose. I knew what I needed to do. I called Alan and asked him to come over. When he arrived, I led him to the living room where Mike was waiting. "Alan, there's something I need to show you," I said, my voice steady. I picked up a small remote and pressed play. The hidden camera footage I'd set up weeks ago began to play on the TV. It showed Beth and Robert invading our privacy, using our things without permission, and treating our home like their own. Alan's face paled as he watched the footage. "Emily, I had no idea it was this bad. Now you see what I've been dealing with," I said, my voice filled with a mix of anger and sadness. "I need you to understand that this can't continue." Alan nodded, his eyes filled with regret. "I do understand, Emily. And I'm sorry. I should have listened to you." I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of relief. It's not too late to make things right, but we need to work together. Alan reached for my hand, his eyes filled with determination. "We will, Emily. I promise." As we sat together watching the footage, I felt a sense of hope. This was the turning point I had been waiting for. and I was ready to take control of my life and my future. The next morning, I woke with a sense of foreboding. Today was the day I would finally confront Alan and his parents with the full truth. I had spent the night preparing, going through the hidden camera footage and organizing my thoughts. This was it, the moment everything would come to light. I called Norma and Joseph, asking them to come over. "There's something important we need to discuss," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course, Emily. We'll be there soon," Norma replied, her voice filled with concern. As I waited for them to arrive, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. I knew this was the only way to make Alan truly understand the impact of his actions and Beth's on our marriage. Mike stayed close, offering silent support. When Norma and Joseph arrived, they looked worried. "What's going on, Emily?" Joseph asked, his eyes searching mine. "Please sit down," I said, gesturing to the living room. Alan and Beth were already there, looking tense. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "I need to show you something," I said, picking up the remote and pressing play. The hidden camera footage began to play on the TV, showing Beth and Robert invading our privacy, using our things without permission, and treating our home like their own. The room was silent as the footage rolled on, the tension thick in the air. Norma's eyes widened in shock, and Joseph's face grew stern. Alan looked pale, his eyes fixed on the screen. Beth's face turned red with embarrassment and anger. "Emily, I had no idea it was this bad," Alan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I tried to tell you, Alan, but you never listened," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "This is what I've been dealing with." Norma turned to Beth, her eyes filled with disappointment. "Beth, how could you do this? This is unacceptable." Beth looked down, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much I was hurting everyone." Joseph shook his head, his voice stern. "Beth, you need to take responsibility for your actions. This behavior can't continue." I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of relief but also a deep sadness. "There's more," I said, reaching into my bag and pulling out a stack of papers. Alan's eyes widened as he saw the divorce papers. "Emily, what are you doing?" "I'm filing for divorce, Alan," I said, my voice steady but filled with pain. "I can't keep living like this. I need to take control of my life." Alan looked devastated, his eyes filled with regret. "Emily, please. We can work this out." "I've tried, Alan. But nothing has changed," I said, my voice breaking. "I need to do what's best for me." Norma and Joseph looked at each other, their faces filled with sadness. "Emily, we're so sorry," Norma said, her voice trembling. "We had no idea things had gotten this bad." "It's not your fault," I said, feeling a mix of gratitude and sorrow. "I just need to move on." Alan reached for my hand, his eyes pleading. "Please, Emily, don't do this." I pulled my hand away, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sorry, Alan, but I have to." As I stood up, I felt a sense of finality. This was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face whatever came next. Mike stood up, wrapping me in a tight hug. "I'm proud of you, sis," he whispered, his voice filled with support. As I walked out of the living room, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. This was the hardest decision I had ever made, but it was the right one. I needed to reclaim my life and my happiness. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. Alan moved out, staying with his parents while we sorted out the details of the divorce. Beth found a place of her own, finally taking responsibility for her life. As I stood in the now empty house, I felt a sense of peace. This was my chance to start over, to build a life on my own terms. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them. For the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. This was my life, and I was determined to make the most of it. The day I moved out felt surreal. The house that had once been a home was now just a collection of memories, both good and bad. I packed the last of my belongings into the car, taking one final look around. Mike stood by my side, his presence a steady anchor. "You ready?" he asked, his voice gentle. Yeah, I said, taking a deep breath. It's time. As we drove away, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a glimmer of hope. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I could finally prioritize my own happiness. A few weeks later, I found myself in a cozy apartment downtown. It was smaller than the house, but it was mine. I spent the first few days unpacking and arranging things just the way I liked. It felt liberating to have complete control over my space. One evening, as I was settling in, my phone rang. It was Norma. "Emily, how are you doing?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine concern. "I'm doing okay, Norma. Adjusting to the new place," I replied, feeling a warmth in her concern. "Alan's been struggling," she said softly. "He misses you." I sighed, feeling a pang of sadness. "I miss him too, but this is what I need right now." "I understand," she said. "Just know that we're here for you no matter what." "Thank you, Norma. That means a lot," I said, feeling a sense of gratitude. After hanging up, I sat on the couch, reflecting on everything that had happened. I knew I had made the right decision, but it didn't make it any easier. Just then there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Mike standing there, holding a bottle of wine. "Thought you could use some company," he said with a grin. "You're a lifesaver," I said, letting him in. We spent the evening talking and laughing, the weight of the past few months slowly lifting. Mike had always been my rock, and I was grateful to have him by my side. A few days later, I received a call from Alan. "Can we meet?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "Sure," I said, my heart racing. "Let's meet at the park." When I arrived, Alan was already there, sitting on a bench. He looked up as I approached, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and hope. "Emily," he said, standing up. "Thank you for meeting me." "Of course," I said, sitting down beside him. "I've had a lot of time to think," he began, his voice steady. "And I realize now how much I took you for granted. I let Beth and Robert come between us, and I didn't respect your boundaries. I'm so sorry." I looked at him, feeling a mix of emotions. "Alan, I appreciate your apology, but this isn't just about Beth and Robert. It's about us and what we need to be happy." "I know," he said, his eyes filled with determination. "I've started seeing a therapist, and I'm working on setting boundaries with Beth. I want to be better for both of us." I felt a glimmer of hope, but also a sense of caution. "That's good, Alan. But we need time. We both need to heal and figure out what we want." He nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "I agree. I just wanted you to know that I'm committed to making things right." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our conversation settling in. "Thank you, Alan," I said finally. "I appreciate you being honest." As we stood up to leave, Alan reached for my hand. "No matter what happens, I want you to be happy, Emily." "I want the same for you," I said, giving his hand a squeeze. As I walked away, I felt a sense of closure. This was the beginning of a new chapter for both of us, one where we could find our own paths to happiness. Over the next few months, I focused on my career and my own well-being. I reconnected with old friends, took up new hobbies, and found joy in the little things. Mike was a constant presence, his support unwavering. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, I felt a sense of peace. I had faced the hardest decision of my life and come out stronger on the other side. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them. This was my life, my journey, and I was determined to make the most of it. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I raised my glass in a silent toast to new beginnings and the strength to move forward. This was my story, and I was ready to write the next chapter.